Well, guys, it's about that time. According to the clock on my table there, it's about 7 p.m. So we're going to get rolling today. Today's discussion is existentialism. Ask as many questions as you need to during the course of this to help clarify. Once you get it, you're going to get it. It'll snap. It'll click into place. But some of this stuff might seem a little bit confusing in the process. And just with regard to this, kind of straight down the line, some of this worldview stuff I know seems confusing because we're really trying to think differently, like, somebody else in a different environment and setting, completely different mindset about life. What I've always told junior hires and high schoolers when teaching this series is, if you don't get it the first time around, it's okay. We're going to be together for most of the rest of our kingdom life, probably. And so we're going to cycle stuff back in, and you'll start seeing things, and it'll hit, it'll land, and you will definitely be picking this up. Once you really have these down, it brings so much clarity to why people do what they do. Come on in, Randy, anywhere? Sylvia, you guys okay sitting around anywhere? I think people will make space for you. And thank you again, guys, who are online. We really appreciate you being here. If everybody here would just remind me to repeat questions if you ask them or if you state something so that the people online can get it, that would be grand. Hey, let's open up with a word of prayer, and then we'll get rolling. Our Lord and God, thank you once again for the fellowship of believers, for an eternal bond with just amazing people here in this life, for minds and hearts that can join with one another in worshiping you and offering you the glory that you deserve, O Lord. Lord, be with us today in our discussion. Help us again to illuminate, to understand, and to make sense of the world that we are in. And I pray all of that for your glory and for your kingdom advancement, Father. Help us to make use of these things. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Amen. How's everybody doing today? Nice to see the sunshine. There's more space over here, guys, if you want to come on in. Any old wherever you can see a video screen, you're good. You don't necessarily have to look at my ugly mug, because that's on the screen too. All right. Well, remember, as we get launched into this series, that a worldview is a set of presuppositions. Presuppositions. What's a presupposition? Well, it's right there parenthetically. A presupposition is an assumption which may be true, partially true, or entirely false. Just an assumption you bring to the table, something you hold to be true, which we hold consciously or subconsciously, consistently or inconsistently about the basic makeup of the world we're in. And the whole reason inconsistently is important is because I hope you've seen already that as we get into this worldview series, most of the worldviews we're contending with here in the West are entirely conflicted. There's massive inconsistencies. That being said, let's deal with some of those in just a moment. I just wanted to set up a basic timeline. Oh, that's not too clear on that screen. A little bit easier to see on this screen. This is just a basic timeline of when these worldviews sort of came into popularity. Most of the worldviews we've dealt with so far are almost exclusively Western. We're going to go Eastern with some worldviews as we progress. But just if you'll notice, theism really kind of ruled the roost from the 400s all the way up until really late 1600s. That's when deism started to make an incursion and gain some popularity. Deism sort of died out after naturalism kicked in. It's not very strong at this stage of the game. So you'll notice, like in the early history of our country, there are a lot of deists. That's because that was sort of the time span in which that was a reigning worldview. Naturalism got going, nihilism kicked in. Nihilism is still around. It's just in such small pockets that you're not likely to encounter it as often. Existentialism, which is where we're going to pick up today, kind of took over in an attempt to get us out of nihilism. And then postmodernism is something we're going to get to after we've done several of the Eastern views, because it's probably the most recent of all of these in terms of its practice. Okay, so what is monotheism? Let's just recap a few things real quick. Monotheism. Belief in one God. Mono, one, theos, God, one God. So monotheist religions in the world.
Christianity, Islam,
and Judaism. And you might say Zoroastrianism, but there are very few Zoroastrians. Did I ever tell you about Zoroastrianism? Modern Zoroastrianism is a religion that believes the end of the world will only come when they have all died out. So they don't marry outside of their sect, and they try not to have kids. So they're just shrinking and shrinking. It's like intentionally trying to weed itself out.
They have a playground in the church back there on the way to, or
Zoroastrians do?
yeah, behind the lyre.
Man. All right, so well, maybe it's a very dangerous playground. Maybe that's the strategy.
I don't know. Yeah, that's the Zoso place.
So
yeah.
What is deism? Come on in, Mom. There's another spot around here. I think Jonah would probably let you sit next to him.
Believe in a God, but he doesn't take part in anything that's going on anymore.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. All right, so there's a God who sets the world running. So a God creates, sets the world running. He's like the watchmaker God. He cranks it up, but then he steps back and just leaves it to its own devices, as it were. So that God doesn't intervene. That God doesn't speak to humanity. All right, after that, we came upon naturalism, materialism. Once you've set God aside and you say, well, God's only role is the one starting the universe, and then you think that you might have some natural mechanism for starting the universe, you can just fire God altogether. And that's essentially what the world did. They just went, we've got no place for you now, nothing else for you to do here. And so God, according to the naturalist, is unemployed. All right, then we got to nihilism. All saving the best for last. Maybe nobody else is allowed to come in now. My wife just walked in. That's why I said that. So what is nihilism? We talked about it last week. It was a real uplifting gathering.
I believe that nothing matters.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So nihilism is the natural outworking of naturalism. Remember, naturalism, when we say there is no God, we also have a whole other set of beliefs that come with that. What is the origin if there is no God? The universe has to be eternal somehow. There must be some way in which the universe is eternal. What is the meaning if there is no God? There is ultimately no meaning. If naturalism is true, there is no meaning. It is just cause and effect, straight down the line. What about morality? What's right and wrong if there is no God? Yeah, I mean, we might say evolution gave us an idea of the, survival of the fittest. You want that to be your governing morality. The one who's strongest is the one who survives. Maybe not the best way to live life. Okay, so morality. No, what about destiny if naturalism is true? Yeah, it's ultimately the death of individuals, the death of humanity collectively, and the death of the whole cosmos. Now we're talking uplifting. And so, and people who started really thinking deeply about the implications of naturalism things started to get dark. And so nihilism comes on the scene as people like Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre and some others are really grappling with this idea of if naturalism is true, is there any meaning? Is there any purpose in this existence? All right, we just talked about why it followed from naturalism. Way to answer your own question, Ben. All right, why can't people live like this? This was Will Provine. You'll remember we pulled up this quote from Will Provine in our last session. He is a naturalist, but he is one of the he was one of the rare, honest naturalists. And this is what he said. Naturalism implies no death, no gods, no life after death, no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no human free will. All are deeply connected to an evolutionary perspective. Why can't people live like that?
They can, it's just terrifying.
It's a very dark existence. Yeah. So they can live in that condition. It's just things start to spiral. I told you a lot of the nihilists, the people who've really grappled with this, their biggest question in life was, why not kill myself? Why not? It seems like that's where everything's headed anyway. Why not just go ahead and move the process forward? What is existentialism? Existentialism is birthed out of nihilism. Okay, Jean-Paul Sartre, I believe, two big names you're going to want to remember for existentialism: Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. Okay, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus. Those are the two main players that brought this about. And they're not really philosophers. They're not really historians or sociologists. They're novelists. That's going to be really important in how existentialism forms up. So if you see my little button over on the corner, here's your philosopher's joke. Existentialism, don't even get me started. All right, here we go. This is Jean-Paul Sartre from his work Nausea. Every existing thing is born without reason, prolongs itself out of weakness, and dies by chance. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The images forewarned immediately leaped up and filled my closed eyes with existences. Existence is a fullness which man can never abandon. I knew it. It was the world, the naked world, suddenly revealing itself, and I choked with rage at this gross, absurd being. All right. What on earth is this guy saying? I want you to notice the term absurd. The existentialist recognizes that nihilism is true. So existentialism starts from the position that nihilism is true. There is no meaning, there's no value, there's no purpose. It is as the naturalists describe it, as the nihilists describe it. It's worthless, all of it, utterly worthless. That's what they call absurdity, and they talk about it all the time that way.
Whenever he says prolongs itself out of weakness, is he saying that they're too weak to kill themselves?
Exactly. In other words, the only reason we don't kill ourselves is because we're afraid. That's prolonging ourselves out of weakness. When he talks about the world being absurd, what he's talking about is the nihilism paradigm is true. This world is dark. It's awful. It's a horrendous thing. And he's talking about confronting it. Okay, so what is existentialism? Existentialism is first and foremost a response to nihilism. It recognizes nihilism is true, and then it goes, what are we going to do? How are we going to get past this? How do we live knowing that nihilism is true? There is no ultimate meaning or value or purpose. Atheistic existentialism, and let me just qualify here. We're going to talk atheistic existentialism today for the most part. I would really like to get to Christian existentialism. There's a variety of existentialism called Christian existentialism. I don't know if we're going to have time, but if we do, I'd like to just dip in and talk about that a little bit. Atheistic existentialism. What is an atheist? There is no God. Okay, the positive affirmation that there is no God. Atheistic existentialism is the recognition that there is no objective meaning, no value, and secondarily, the assertion that the purpose of the human is to subjectively make up meaning and value. All right, so in other words, there is no meaning or purpose. Now we have to make it up. We have to create meaning and purpose and value ourselves. Albert Camus, a literature of despair is a contradiction in terms, he says. In the darkest depths of our nihilism, I have sought only for the means to transcend nihilism. We're just trying to get out of it. Is there any way we can get out of it? All right, atheistic existentialism accepts naturalism, or the following precepts from naturalism. Let's roll through what they accept from naturalism. Number one, matter exists. All right, so there is a material universe, that's real. Number two, God does not exist. There can't possibly be a God. Number three, the cosmos exists as a uniformity of natural constants in a closed system. What on earth does that mean? Anybody want to guess? All right. Remember we talked about kind of the pool table world, where you've got like just ball hits ball, and it's all moving around, but it's all just causes and effects. In a closed system, when we say a closed system, what we mean is there's nothing outside of the box.
Nothing active.
Yeah, there's no God. There's nothing that is bigger than the causes and effects. All there are causes and effects. So the existentialist says, yes, we're all just a byproduct of causes and effects. History, they say, is a linear stream of events linked by cause and effect, but without any overarching purpose, right? There's no purpose to our lives. Sounds a lot like nihilism so far, doesn't it? Yes? Sure. If you say so, Ben. Ethics is related only to human beings. Now, this diverges from nihilism. Where were ethics in nihilism? Non-existent. They don't exist. Suddenly, The existentialist is saying, okay, there are ethics, but ethics are only things that human beings deal with or human beings believe are real. So right and wrong is purely a human thing. Okay. The nature of human beings is where existentialism really diverges. This is where existentialism takes on its own flavor. By the way, these little stupid comics I tossed in here. I don't know if you can read what that guy's saying. I am unhappy. I seek a change in our monotonous, joyful existence. All right. The cosmos is material, but some of the material is different than the other material stuff, namely humans. All right. You and I are different from the rest of the cosmos. So here's what the existentialist says. They say all the universe, cause and effect, it's all the same stuff. But then there are these things by some weird accident that emerged, and they're suddenly aware that they exist. And they start looking around at the universe and they think, this universe is absurd. And they think, we're different than this. We seem to have some meaning or purpose, or at least I feel like we should. And I feel like death is a terrible thing. This all reflects a Christian worldview, doesn't it? Right? I mean, these are things that Christians often think. Death is not the way this was meant to be. This is supposed to be permanent. There's evil, there's good. So the existentialist is recognizing something that humans naturally experience. Have you guys ever seen Garfield without Garfield? Okay, there's this great website called Garfield Without Garfield. If you want to see existentialism or nihilism, look up Garfield Without Garfield. You've seen a Garfield comic, right? Garfield Without Garfield is a comic strip where they just take Garfield out of the comics. And then when you read the comics, they're dark. They're just like this. Life, this is it. This is all there is. You see, you got no word bubbles and you got no Garfield there. So this is what the life of John would look like without Garfield. It is a dark and hopeless existence. I put that in there just because that really fits with the paradigm. This is the existentialist problem. They recognize there's no meaning and value. Now they have to generate it. Okay. So the nature of human beings is where that we diverge. Where naturalism focuses on sameness with the universe, existentialists is going to acknowledge the same things, but they're focusing on the differences. It's not that we're the same with the universe, we're different. How are we different than the rest of the stuff in the universe? Try to be an existentialist. What do you think? What makes us different than the stuff?
You know, it said that we're aware, or we think we're aware.
Okay. Yeah, so, and I like the way you even phrased that, because it's not that we're aware, but we at least think we're aware. We have this perception that we have an awareness and a self-awareness, even if we're not what we think we are. Other ways in which we're different.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please.
I keep seeing determinism
Mm-hmm.
come up all the time.
Yes.
If they believe in determinism, who's determining?
Correct.
I don't
There, yeah. Steve asked about determinism. If determinism is something that keeps being mentioned here, who is determining? And the answer is, it's not a who. It is an impersonal agency. It's the universe. In other words, you are the product of causes and effects. There's no intelligence out there that's making this happen. It's just what happens. It's like the dominoes that got flicked. Nobody flicked the dominoes, but they're just falling forever in eternity. You think that you're choosing to fall at a particular time or do something, but really, you're just the byproduct of what happened before. And this is intrinsic. If there is no God in the universe, this is intrinsic in every other worldview. Any atheist or agnostic, any skeptic who does not believe in God, who thinks they have free will, is living incoherently. They just don't understand that they're just completely out of step with their actual worldview. They have no clue that they're missing it.
So Dawkins did not make up his mind to be an atheist.
Yeah, and he's actually been approached with that particular challenge before. He says Dawkins did not make up his mind to be an atheist. Somebody says, weren't you just dancing to your genetics? And aren't you just puppeting the same things that really are the byproduct of your genetics and what you had for breakfast? And he said, yes, but I feel like I'm creating meaning, but he acknowledges it. At least he acknowledges it with certain crowds. Yeah, Brian.
I feel like somewhere I heard that humans are the only
Yeah. And
Would that factor into what?
yes, we are, and I say that periodically. Well, I love that phrase because we have a depth and a difference even from the rest of the natural realm in the sense that we don't just think, but we think about thinking. We are self-aware to the point that we are reflective on a level that massively outpaces everything else in this cosmos that we know of. Like the difference between us and every other animal is so dramatic that most naturalists are given pause, at least a little bit. We are tremendously different. We think about thinking. And so they would say, yeah, that's part of what makes us different. Here's the problem with the thinking about thinking. We are so smart that we recognize how absurd this universe is. We're so smart that we look around and think, the brute facts of this universe stink. I don't like this. This is the conundrum the existentialist is in. Why do you think they would be bothered by this universe? Maybe we should hang on to that for a little bit. Okay. And that's, as a Christian, yeah. Yeah. You're allowed to answer as a Christian, by the way. It's okay. But yeah, as a Christian, we look around at the world as it is and the nature of reality, and we think this isn't right. There's something that's out of step here. It's hopelessly broken, and it makes sense for a Christian because we know why it's broken. Because of us, because of sin. But for the existentialists, they look around and they go, it's broken, but there's no reason they should really think that it's broken.
Yeah, how do they know it's broken? Great
question. Yeah, and this will kind of fit in with some of the criticisms. I don't want to jump into the criticisms too soon. We'll try to give all this a fair shake. You guys like Bob Ross? Oh, what a wonderful man. You know, we're going to be spending eternity with Bob Ross. You know, he's a believer. Yeah, Bob Ross and Chuck Norris. Heaven's going to be awesome. I want to have a sit down with those two guys. It'd be awesome. All right. The subjective world is what existentialism is going to focus on. What is the difference between objective and subjective, guys? Objective, subjective.
Objective transcends everything. So
yeah.
So that there's a standard for everyone to, kind of like an object that you can see the reference.
Right.
And then subjective is however you see it.
Okay. Yeah, so objective rises above the human condition. It's bigger than you or I. 2 + 2 = 4, correct? All right, now we would recognize that as an objective truth. It's true no matter what, true no matter whether you rename 2 and call it something else, so long as the concept remains 2 + 2 = 4. That's an objective truth. And then there's the subjective truth. I like broccoli. Is that true for you? Maybe, maybe not. All right. The jalapeno cheese stuffed olives. I like those. Wow. I just discovered that I like those not too long ago. But that's the subjective world. Not everybody's going to like the same things. My father eats pizzas with green olives and anchovies. Not everybody's going to like that. That is subjective. And in the same way we talk about that, the existentialist says, well, that ultimately is what meaning is. Meaning is simply something subjective. I create it myself. I make it on my own. Okay, so we have the appearance of self-consciousness and self-determinacy. Are you free? If naturalism is true, are you free?
No.
No. If nihilism is true, are you free?
No.
Now, if existentialism is true, are you free? Yeah, and here's what they would say. No, we're not, but we think we are. We are operating under the perception that we're free. And in fact, we're making choices as if we were really making choices. All right. So that delusion, that illusion of freedom is part of what makes us different than the rest of the world. Okay. Our existence precedes from our essence. That is, we make ourselves into what we will be. So are you choosing something? The existentialist says, yes. You might not know what you're choosing or how you're choosing it, but you're creating a particular reality. We are forging who we are. This is why I use Bob Ross here. You know what Bob Ross talks about? Well, as soon as he starts making a painting.
Happy trees.
Yes, happy trees. This is your own little world here. We're gonna make our own little world. We're gonna have to make a lot of choices about what we're gonna do in our world. And so he talks about these things and he makes mistakes. Oh, well, you know, every mistake is just an opportunity. And, you know, we're going to put another tree. When you watch him, don't you just think, oh, you're ruining it? Like as soon as he starts doing something, you're like, oh, you just destroyed the picture, but then he makes it okay. This is the existentialist dream right here. Bob Ross is a perfect illustration of that. We have our own little world. We're creating our own little reality. We're shaping it up as we like it. Now, some of this is probably sounding okay to you guys. Some of this probably sounds a little bit good. All right, here's Jean-Paul Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre says, if God did not exist, there is at least one being in whom existence precedes essence. Now, what he means by that is, I come into existence, but I don't know what I am yet. All right, so I'm born, I don't know what I am yet. I at least think that I'm going to choose what I am. I think I'm going to make something happen. Okay, existence precedes essence. A being who exists before he can be defined by any concept, and this being is man. First of all, man exists. He turns up and appears on the scene, and only afterward defines himself. When did you learn about God? Personally, when did you learn about God? Okay. Did you know you existed before you knew God existed? Okay. Then the existentialist would say, see, this is indicative of who we are. We turn up on the scene and we have to become self-aware. And after we become self-aware, then we can choose who we are and what we're being. So you didn't really know God until you had the chance to begin to know yourself. And after that, you would say that you began to know God. Of course, the existentialist doesn't believe that God exists, but for you, that was important. The whole idea of the existentialist here is, I show up, I'm a thing who exists, and now I have to figure out what I am. Okay, here's the way James Sire describes it. Let us say a soldier fears he is a coward. Is he a coward? Only if he acts as a coward, and his actions will proceed not from a nature defined beforehand, but from choices he makes when the bullets start to fly. We can call the soldier a coward only if he does cowardly deeds, and these will be deeds he will choose to do. So if the soldier fears he is a coward, let him do brave deeds when they are called for. All right, do you see? The man is forging himself. He's deciding what he will be. At least he thinks he is deciding what he will be. And for the existentialists, they would say, this is the crux of what a human being is.
James Sire shot at.
What's that? No, he's a philosopher. At least I don't think he was. Maybe he was. I've met the guy. He's a lot of fun. All right. A subjective world. Existentialism is all about a subjective world. We have arguments for distinctiveness. So let's think about what makes us distinct from the world. The objective world appears to be absurd. How many of you don't like the way the world works? Anybody? How many of you don't like the way people think? Other than me. All right. Have you noticed that's the case? How many of you don't like the way everybody behaves? Do you not like the way that the natural world sometimes behaves? Things, tsunamis, or even a rainstorm, right? Or winter. All right. So because you're recognizing that, the existentialist says you're different than the world because a rock does not consider anything about the world. It does not think the world is good or the world is bad. Most animals seem to have no consideration about the world they're in. The antelope might not like being eaten by the lion, but it really doesn't have any moral judgments about being eaten by the lion. It seems to know that that's kind of the rule set. Whereas if we were eaten by the lion, we would probably be lamenting the fact mightily because the universe could be some other way in our minds. That's why they say we perceive the absurdity of it. Okay. Fyodor Dostoevsky, famous Russian novelist, brilliant author, very difficult to read. He wrote a work called The Underground Man, and he's describing existentialism in this book. And so you have this challenger, and the challenger is speaking to the one he calls the underground man. Here's what the challenger says. 2 and 2 do make 4. Nature doesn't ask your advice. She isn't interested in your preferences or whether or not you approve of her laws. You must accept nature as she is with the consequences that implies. So a wall is a wall, etc., etc. Then his protagonist comes in. But good Lord, what do I care about the laws of nature and arithmetic if I have my reasons for disliking them, including the one about 2 and 2 making 4? I don't have to accept a stone wall just because it's there and I don't have the strength to breach it. In other words, so the world has a reality to it. What if I don't accept that? What if I don't like that? And the existentialist would be like, that's it. That's what humans are about. We're about rebelling against this world as it is. Okay? See, we're creating our meaning. There's no meaning or value, but now we're rebelling against an absurd world that has no meaning or value by making it up. I don't like that 2 + 2 = 4. I'm going to rebel against it.
So we've made something up to rebel against.
Yes, pretty much. The world we find ourselves in looks absurd to us. And so rebelling against it, for most existentialists, they believe this is the best thing that humans can do. By the way, we're going to criticize the heck out of this as we go along. I'm just really trying to shape out what it's about before we start doing that. Yeah. It is. Absolutely. Yep. This ties mightily into critical theory and how it's formed up. This is for when you hear people saying things like math is a masculine ideology that was created. They're just words that were created by the male patriarchy, and women need to form up their own math. All right, now that stuff stems from an existentialist mindset. The idea that we're just making up reality as we go along. Whatever we say or describe, that's the way it is. Existentialism leads into postmodernism. We'll see that as we go along. Dostoevsky says this in The Underground Man. Meaning of a man's life is to prove to himself every minute that he is a man and not a piano key. All right. I love that as a quote. I mean, I think it's a cool quote, but it's an existentialist quote. The idea, what's the difference between a man and a piano key? I'm not going to be played. I'm not going to be a utility for other people. I'm not going to be someone else's to use. I am different than material stuff. Right? And that's the idea. You know, part of the rebellion here is actually a rebellion towards a more theological view of what humans are, but they have no foundation for it. So what's good or evil according to an existentialist? Now we're making it up, remember? We're making it all up, meaning, value, and purpose. So what do you think would be good and evil for an existentialist? What feels good? You might go utilitarianism, what's good for the greatest number. You actually won't even go that route typically. But that's a great guess, actually, the idea that the best for the best number of people. Yes, as an individual. Here's the thing. An existentialism only cares about themselves typically. Their world is the most important world. An existentialist probably would not care for prisons if they were in one. But an existentialist might recognize that it's good we have prisons because I don't want to be around those people. So again, I become the center of the world. It's all about my meaning and value, not anyone else's necessarily. So here's the good according to the existentialist. The good action is the consciously chosen action. What? The good action is the consciously chosen action, as opposed to inaction. So a man once came to Jean-Paul Sartre and said, "Sir, I don't know what to do with my life." And he said, "Create, make. You're the author." Right? In other words, you fabricate it, you put it together. It's all within your power. That's Jean-Paul Sartre, who has a lazy eye, by the way, if you're wondering why he looks like that. Jean-Paul Sartre says this: to choose to be this or that is to affirm at the same time the value of what we choose, because we can never choose evil, we always choose the good. And what does he mean by that? We can never choose evil, we always choose the good. Yeah, the fact that you chose it is what makes it good. So if you chose it, it is by definition good because you chose it. Yes, very much at the center of the universe. And this is why subjectivity is the most prevalent thing in existentialism. It is all about how I feel, what I think, what I want. If I can convince myself that I have meaning, then I have succeeded in life, right? I don't have to depend on other people to infuse me with that value. I have to make it up myself. And if I choose it, it's good. Yeah, Chris. Great question. Most of them are going to have a very tough time defining evil. They would say, I think probably the thing that you don't choose, that's evil. Which, right? It's a great question. Was Adolf Hitler evil by an existentialist paradigm? I mean, he made some choices, right? I mean, controversial choices. That shows bravery. Right. And usually, let's say, well, according to your paradigm, maybe hurting people is wrong, but why would you say that that should be the case for my paradigm? If Jeffrey Dahmer is an existentialist, or any number of sociopaths or homicidal murderers, psychopaths, I should say, or homicidal murderers, right? If their desire is to harm people and bring injury to people, who would we be to say that they were wrong or mistaken? Isn't that just them living out their truth, Oprah style? Yeah. Yeah, so far. Okay, so the bad or evil might be passivity, refusing to act unless that is the chosen act. In other words, if I choose to lay on my couch all day, that's virtue. But if I refuse to actually make choices in this life, then maybe I'm not doing very well. Albert Camus' The Plague. Now, the strongest argument, I think, for existentialism is how cool Albert Camus looks in that coat with the cigarette hanging out of his mouth. Albert Camus, I wanted to dislike the guy when I was in college, but they kept making me read things that he'd written, and I really liked Albert Camus. I read The Plague 3 times, I think now, which is his kind of preeminent work. And it nearly persuades me that existentialism is true, except that it fails miserably in several regards. Which is, I mean, it's a good novel. Have any of you guys ever read The Plague? Okay, I'm going to ruin it for you if that's okay today. Is that all right? The brilliance of this book is it's set in an old European city. This city is afflicted with a plague. So rats start coming out of the sewers and out of the drains and their holes and dying in the streets. They quarantine the whole city. It's a hot summer, sweltering heat, plague, death everywhere. The whole novel is framed up in that paradigm. All right, so what you have is the plague, which represents the absurdity of life. And then you have all of these characters who represent different worldviews. And they're in this novel, they're dealing with one another in this novel. So Monsieur Michel is the concierge of an apartment building. He looks around at his apartment building, sees all these rats pouring out of every place, and he keeps decrying the fact that other buildings have these rats, and he's hiding them from everyone else and pretending like his building doesn't have rats. Meanwhile, he's acquired the plague for himself. He's denying the plague exists until he eventually gets sick and dies. This is the person who does not perceive deeply enough to realize that the universe is absurd. Okay, so this is the non-attentive person who's not paying attention to the world as it is. So think your average knucklehead working anywhere and not really just paying attention to the world, like working for the weekends, and then suddenly they're about to die and they're like, why is this happening? Right, and it just occurs to them right there. That's that individual. Then you have a guy who's the old Spaniard. He retired at age 50. I talked to you guys a little bit about this last week. He balances peas on the edge of a butter knife and he moves them from one pan to the next. And every 15 peas, it's time to eat. What could be more simple? That's a nihilist. This is the person who he delights in the heat and the discomfort and the fact that everyone's dying. He's looking around like, ha ha. Right? That's the nihilist. That's the individual who looks around and thinks, the world's absurd, it's useless, one thing's as good as the next. Then you have Monsieur Cotard, who is a criminal. So you have this criminal who's wanted by the police, and the plague hits, and then this guy goes around and he just takes advantage of everybody. He is the sinner in an existentialist world. And so Camus tries to project, here's what evil looks like. The guy goes around, takes advantage of people. He walks around, he delights in the fact that the plague is going on because he's not wanted by the police. Oh, we're all in this together, as he manipulates and takes control of others' lives. Now, what can you possibly do wrong as an existentialist? Because this guy, he's portrayed novelistically, he's portrayed as a villain. Could you be a villain in an existentialist paradigm? Yeah, he's making bold choices. He's stepping out and doing. He is embracing the plague and using it to his greatest advantage. So when you stop and you think, is Camus really selling me on this? You start looking at characters and going, nope, I don't buy that. I'm not buying it. Jean Thoreau and Dr. Raoult are the two. They're the two individuals who are supposed to be kind of the protagonists. These are the good people, the good existentialists. And for some reason, they're fighting the plague and they're helping people out. Now, what makes that good? Why are they good? And Cotard, who is the criminal, why is he bad? Why is the old Spaniard bad? Why would the concierge be bad? You have two guys fighting the plague. They're the protagonists. Why is what they're doing good? Now, I got to be honest. I read the novel the first time. Most of the stuff just right past my head. Didn't understand enough about it. Read it the second time and I went, there's no way. These two guys are set up as the protagonists. They're the good guys. And then I started to recognize why they're the good guys.
If you're worried about what happens to you,
Mm-hmm.
this is where you're going?
This is part of it.
Okay, so if it's going to benefit me,
Mm-hmm.
that's good. If somebody's going to rip me off or
Mm-hmm.
abuse me in some way, he's a criminal, he's evil.
Right. Well, they want us to believe that. Camus wants us to believe that. These two individuals are being selfless in the midst of a plague. They're helping everyone out.
Are they just creating a hedge?
Could be. I'm looking at this and I think, that looks like what Christians do when there's a plague. Every time we've had these major plagues in Europe, the Christians are the ones who were like in the midst of it, helping people out and taking care of the sick. And I mean, getting the plague and contracting plagues and dying. Christians have done this throughout all of European history. This, by the way, the Romans thought the Christians were insane when they were doing this kind of thing, even back in the ancient era. And so I'm looking at these guys and I'm going, they're doing what Judeo-Christian values say is good for people to do. And he makes them the protagonists. Are they the protagonists because they were good existentialists, or are they the protagonists because we all have basic Judeo-Christian values, and we look at two people and go, those are the ones who seem to be doing the right thing?
Well, as existentialists, would they all be the same because they're all making choices? So they're all the same. Nobody's any better.
Yeah. If existentialism is true, there's no reason any one of these people should be better than any other. But you can convey that in a novel form. You can't convey that as a philosophical work. Remember, I told you it was really important that Sartre and Camus are novelists, they're playwrights, and the stuff that they produce is a narrative that's meant to sell you on the idea that existentialism is true. By the way, many people think that and this was early existentialism, they said poetry is going to replace all of the ethics that we have because a good poem will show us what's really right. Why?
Where'd they learn that?
Yeah. Dr. Seuss. These are people who are saying, if I'm made to feel, if you can affect my value set by making me feel something, then you have made me different. That's why poetry will get us to places that a philosophical work or an ethical work can't. That was their opinion. Okay. The origin and destiny of an existentialist. Does existentialism escape determinism? What do you think?
What they believe is true and that came into existence by accident, and there's a time step on humanity.
Okay. Yeah. on humanity in general. I mean, we are determined to die as an individual. There is only a certain number of years you're going to live. All right. Others, do you think it escapes determinism?
You're making choices that seem to fly in the face of determinism.
It seems to. The question would be, are they really making choices?
What's the definition of determinism?
Yeah, determinism is where your actions were bound to happen. All right. You think that okay, so they would say this: you think you're making a choice, but what's really happening, this is what the nihilist would say, what's really happening every time you think you're making a choice is simply that you're unaware of all the features that are going into what's happening in you. Like you think you're making a choice, but really it's chemistry. It is what you had for breakfast, right? It's all these other features have fed into you. You think you're making a choice, you're really not. Right?
You're just recognizing the change.
Yes. And you believe you're making a change. You believe that you're making a choice, but it's all being pushed. You're nothing but a pool ball. Right? So you might think, well, I was going to choose to, eat this filet mignon, but now I'm going to eat that black licorice. Ha! I've overcome determinism. And they would say, no, you were bound to just do that. Like that was you trying to fight that on some level, but the you is just the byproduct of stuff. Mm-hmm. Right. And they would say it all leads back to the original pool ball, if there was an original pool ball with the universe, whatever started it. And that's a great question. Most of them would say the universe is eternal on some level, so that they try to keep pushing it back further so that we've got just a sequence of events. We can never fathom all the things that have fed into making us make the decision we made today. They have to believe that it's eternal, right? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of ways in which this is falling apart, but we'll get to more of them in just a second here. So does it escape determinism? No, it really doesn't. And what they're left with is just struggling with this idea of going, but I can't know what choices I'm going to make. So I feel like it's significant. And to me, it seems like I'm making choices.
So they try to escape determinism.
Exactly. They're still left with an absurd universe still pulling the strings. Can any of our subjective choices really be significant if they're only unknown to us based on the ignorance of their origins or outcomes? And this ultimately is what we're talking about. We just don't know why we're choosing what we're choosing, but we're still just pool balls bouncing around on the table. What about meaning for the existentialist? I found this great. Existentialist, optimistic nihilist. Just because we're doomed doesn't mean we can't have a good time.
Whatever a good time is, and why do they even care to explain any of this?
Right.
Yeah. So,
yeah. Now, think about this though. This is honestly, existentialism is where most people probably live. They really haven't plunged the depths of what they think or why they think it. But when it comes down to it, if you have somebody who lives for football, that's an existentialist. Right. Yeah. And this Chris asked, what leads an existentialist to be bothered by something like injustice? This is one of the big problems with existentialism in general. Camus said, whatever you choose is right. Whatever you choose is right. But then Camus griped nonstop about nuclear warfare. Sartre. This is Sartre, not Camus. Sartre complained nonstop about nuclear warfare and how we were all going to kill each other with the atomic bomb. But yet, whatever we choose is right. So, doesn't make sense. Can humans really rule their own world through subjective means? Okay. Can you subjectively create your own meaning and value? Can you rule your own world? Your Bob Ross painting, can you make it what you want?
Not really making the decisions you're making.
Okay, yeah. If determinism is true, no, we're not even really making the right decisions or the decisions. Let me ask you this: how many of you would love to fly? Okay, if flying's not that difficult, I mean, like without a plane, flying's not that difficult. You just throw yourself at the ground and miss. But let's say you decide you want to fly. Okay, so you step up on top of a building, you walk up to the ledge and you go, I am the master of my own world, and you step off. Reality.
Yeah, you can only glide for a little while.
And just for a little while.
Yeah.
All right. The fact is there are limitations in this life, right? There are a number of things limiting you right now. You know that thing that we tell kids that is just like that horrific lie? You can be anything you want to be. What an absurd thing to tell children. Of course you can't be anything you want to be. I want to be an NBA basketball player. That's never going to happen. All right. If whatever your desire is not necessarily something you're going to be able to attain because you've got physical limitations. You know what most existentialists rage at more than anything else? What bothers them more than anything else? Death. That's the end of my choices, or the choices I think I have. Right? And so I run up to the end of the line, and how do I stop it? I can't seem to stop it. This is part of the absurdity of life.
Choose not to stop.
Yeah. Just choose not to. It's Stephen Wright, who's, I don't know if you've ever seen the comic Stephen Wright. He has this line where he says, I plan to live forever. So far, so good. It's like watching Eeyore. Yeah. So far, so good.
He says, I know when I'm going to die because my birth certificate has an expiration.
It's like king of the one-liners. Guy's awesome.
We do the same thing.
Yeah.
I sit up in the morning, I prop my feet over the side of the bed, I said, dear Lord, thank you, I got up this far.
Yeah. What a blessing. All right. We do have limitations of abilities, and this bothers existentialists more than it probably bothers you as a Christian. Any of you feeling physical pain as you get older? We having that occasionally? Randy went in to get surgery last week, and I told him Sunday, my neck hurt all week. I had neck issues all week, which is a good prayer reminder. But it's one of those things that I just think, this is dumb. My neck sometimes gets injured because I sneezed. It's like, that's absurd. This world is absurd. But for a Christian, we look at this and go, yeah, but this is the way it's supposed to be. There is a degeneration and a dying, and this world is imperfect, but we know of the next one that's to come. For an existentialist, this is absurd, and there's no good resolution. About limitations of circumstance. We were in the Dominican Republic a few weeks ago, and it's amazing how you get so engrossed in first world life and thinking about what's normal, and then you see a third world country or second world country, and you look around at the way people live and think, the majority of our planet is not in the same boat that I'm in. Those people in the Dominican Republic, we met a guy who, he was an electrician, certified electrician and certified welder, and had been out of work for like, what was it, 11 months, something like that, because of like the whole COVID thing, and ended up taking a job as a jazzercise instructor at the resort. And we asked him, like, with that kind of, ability, why don't you try to get out of the country and leave, come to the United States and ply your trade? And he's like, if they would let us leave the country, everyone would leave this country.
Did you do a jazzercise class?
I didn't. A few other people who were here might have.
Was it electric?
I sat and watched them, and it was pretty awesome. It was in the pool. Yeah, they had a good time. Yeah, it was pretty entertaining.
When you say it, it sounds different than
So I was doing some jazzercise. All right. They're also limited by other subjective wills exercised over their own or our own. Again, think of the person who's incarcerated. I'd sure like to be doing something different. Well, sorry, there's an objective reality, and it's infringing on you. Another book by Tolstoy, who's another author. Tolstoy had a lot of Christian themes he wrote on, but he wrote a book called The Death of Ivan Ilyich. Don't ever read this book. I had to read this for death and dying. It was a man who was dying. And this is in an era before a lot of the sicknesses and illnesses were known, but he probably had cancer. And the doctor came and diagnosed him with a floating kidney, right? Which basically, like, old timey medicine was like, well, your kidney came loose. It's floating around your body somewhere. And that's how they were describing what was happening to him. And so the bulk of the book is people just, he went from this man of prestige to just like forgotten and ignored, and his wife was having parties while he's upstairs just dying, and him over and over again just trying to will his kidney back into place, because he just knew he could push it there if he could just muster the sufficient will. But it's a story of a man dying beyond his means. And what's great about the book is it flies in the face of the existentialist view, the idea that you can be anything you want to be. No. The world gets a say in this. Objective reality gets a say in this. You might not like that 2 and 2 make 4, but you can't stop it. All right. Regarding meaning, does subjectively creating meaning really pull us out of the nihilistic mire? If you make it up, if you say nihilism is true, and then you say, so I'm going to make up my own meaning, did you really escape from nihilism? What do you think?
You're just kind of happily deluding yourself.
That's what's going on. It's
how deluded you are.
It is a delusion of self. It's the idea that I'm going to fabricate this puppet show in my mind that makes me think that I have some control and some purpose. I know that I really don't, but if I can convince myself and others, then I can live as if there is meaning and purpose. But we're just creatively fooling ourselves, aren't we? Elaborately, what about soteriology, salvation? Hey, if existentialism is true, what is love? What's love if existentialism is true?
Whatever's on Netflix.
It can be whatever you want it to be, but it's all going to be entirely selfish, isn't it? Because it's all up to the individual. It's what the individual's choosing. So someone says, I love you, which means you benefit me for a time. I like the way you make me feel about me. I like the way you make me feel. How's that for a romantic line?
How do these people exist together if they each feel they're perfect?
That is a fantastic question. She asks, how do these people even exist together? And this is a problem for them because they're constantly bumping into other human beings that have a different value set. Camus and Sartre were really good friends until they began to disagree. And then they hated each other. Do you guys remember the term solipsism? I used it earlier this year. Solipsism? Solipsism is the belief that I'm the only person who actually exists, that all of you are a fabrication of my mind. All right? For you, I'm telling you what solipsism is right now, but really, if solipsism is true, you're telling yourself what solipsism is right now through me. I'm a fabrication that was created by your mind. So you're sitting here looking at me and you're thinking I'm an objective secondary person, but I'm not. I'm just part of your brain, part of your world. All right, as is everyone else in this room. All right, so that's solipsism. Existentialism leads to a sort of practical solipsism. It's everybody living in sort of their own world. Everyone else only exists insofar as they help me control my narrative and keep myself happy about what's happening in my life. They're important insofar as they accomplish that, but as soon as they get in the way, what should I do with another person? Cut them loose, abandon them. Like this is about my happiness. It's me time. Does it sound like our culture? Because everyone still lives with very existential values. Yeah, Chris. Yeah, yeah. Right.
He would not apply those rules to this volunteering.
Correct.
He would say, no, that's what you cannot do, you can't create your meaning. He would not allow.
Yeah.
In fact, he was adamant against that.
Yep.
He lived that way.
Right. Yeah. Chris was saying that Christopher Hitchens, who was one of the great atheists of this past century. No longer an atheist because he's dead. But Chris Hitchens was very anti-Christian, very outspoken against Christianity, but also very outspoken against Islam, and said that Islam was a travesty. Religion ruins everything, he was famous for saying. But the idea was, what I'm choosing is right, and it's right for me, but everybody else needs to choose something that looks a little bit more like what I'm choosing.
I don't know how they still, I don't know how they exist.
Yeah. Well, not very well. Honestly, existentialists sever relationships all the time. It's very normative in our culture, right? Where there are a lot of existentialists. Salvation that existentialism seeks is salvation from nihilism. Does it get us away from nihilism? As we said before, I don't think it does. Here's the problem. An existentialist might think they've created meaning or value, but then they run into any problem in life and suddenly that all starts falling apart. The puppet show, the theater falls over and they have to begin trying to reassemble their little kingdom. Stuff like death will do that. So let's see whether or not they actually succeeded. Jean-Paul Sartre, last words as Jean-Paul Sartre lays dying. This is the man who said, whatever is right, I create my own value. I have failed. And then he died. That is the best known existentialist in world history. His last words, I have failed, and then he dies. Here's something interesting about Albert Camus. Apparently Albert Camus committed his life to Jesus Christ before he died, but he did not get to publicly display it. There was a pastor by the name of Howard Mama, who was an American pastor in France, and he would go and he would preach at a church during the summers in France. And Camus started meeting with him. I guess he came in for a confession at some stage of the game, and then he wanted to talk about Christianity. And so Mama records that they got together on a regular basis. It's well known that they became friends during 2 summers while Howard Mama was there. Camus asked to be baptized. And Mama said, you were baptized as an infant. You don't need to be baptized again. And then he said to Camus, would you like to make your profession of faith public? And Camus said, I'm not ready just yet. And so they said, well, we'll see you next summer. That February, Camus died in a car crash. So he never did get to see Howard Mama again. There's a book written about this, about the encounters they had with one another. The existentialist world denies this is even possible. There's no way Camus converted to Christ, but there's really good evidence he actually did change his mind. Whether or not he actually was saved, or whether or not he was going to be saved, and the adversary took him first, we don't know. Sad instance, though. I mean, man, what a great conversion that would have been if that had been worldwide and known.
But if conversion to Christianity was his choice, then it was good.
He would have left, from the discussion, he was leaving existentialism behind, because acknowledging that God exists means there's an objective morality bigger than us. So for him to say this would have been, it's the founder of existentialism, one of the 2 founders of existentialism, who would have flipped on it and basically said, there is a God, there's meaning, there's purpose, there's value. Everything I've said up to this point was wrong. But we never got that opportunity. Okay, so let's criticize existentialism for a little bit here. What is prime reality according to the existentialist? What's the really real? What do you think, guys? Themselves? Okay, I'm really real. I'm the subjective reality. And then there's an objective reality. It's really real. It's the world. Okay? So the world's real. I'm real. But I don't have to like the world. And I'm going to be rebellious against the world by trying to create meaning and value, even though there really isn't any. Okay? See any problem with that? It does. And here's the thing. This is why it succeeds in novels. And thanks, Pat. This is why it succeeds in novels, because in a novel, you can control the camera angle, you control the narrative, you control who says what and how they say it and what they're feeling and what they're not feeling. You don't have dark moments in normal life. Real life is not a novel. Real life is not a movie. Real life, you have moments where you go, I'm just making this up. Real life, you have moments where you're stuck with yourself for a moment and you go, I'm really a terrible person when it comes down to it. And you go, there might be a God. I'm terrified that there's a God. There could be a God, which, by the way, was the nihilist Kafka. I mean, that was sort of a sustained cry that guy had over and over again. God's dead, right? I mean, we're sure God's dead. It seems like he's dead. How I wish God wasn't dead, but I mean, it really seems like he's dead. Or is he dead? And this is just sort of this mantra that all of his works produced. In that, you see people scared. The atheist has good reason to be terrified that God exists. What is the nature of external reality? Is there anything outside of this world? Nope. We better hope not. The existentialists better hope not. All right. What is a human being according to existentialism? Matter. Matter and energy, but also anything else? Will. They seem to have a subjective will. At least they think they do. All right. So we are a weird anomaly in the universe. We're self-aware, and that makes us really upset. Honestly, it's very sad. It's very upsetting to be self-aware in an absurd universe. That's what a human being is. What happens to a person at death? What do you think? Just gone. The existentialist has to affirm what everybody else affirms because they're essentially a naturalist. They're essentially, coming in as the nihilist here. You're dead and that's it. So that's the end of everything. So they fear death. They really fear death.
Or you just think it's dead.
Yeah. I believe that I might be dead. Why is it possible to know anything at all as an existentialist? It really isn't. Now they would say my subjective life is all that really matters. Whatever I believe, that is the most true thing. And so you see that, again, think about the initial temptation that was posed to Adam and Eve. You can become like God. You can have the knowledge of good and evil. And the existentialist is on the scene going, I know the difference between right and wrong, between good and evil. I understand. In fact, I'm God of my own universe. And that's really how they're functioning. Existentialists are typically very unhappy people when they brush up against a Christian because you threaten everything they believe. They have to hate you. They have to disprove you. My son, one moment. Hey, bud, I'm teaching group right now. Can I do anything for you? He hung up. All right. How does the existentialist know what's right and wrong? Well, what's right for an existentialist, guys? Whatever you choose. Whatever you choose is right. What's wrong? Nothing. Maybe not choosing. If you don't choose, maybe that's wrong. Okay. What's the meaning of human history?
What led to me?
Yeah, human history. Well said. What led to me is what Howard said. Human history is all about me. Like it doesn't even matter whether things are historically true or valid. What matters is how it impacts me or how I can use it. Because life begins and ends with me. My experience is all that I'm ever going to really get. I don't have your experience, and your experience is not all that important to me, except as it contributes to my little project. Make sense? Now, go ahead.
Is that like, if you leave somebody's house, they aren't anymore?
Yeah. So, yeah, Pat says if you leave someone's house, they aren't anymore. It's sort of if the tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? For the existentialist, they would say it doesn't or it doesn't matter. Because if it's not part of my experience, then it does not matter. My experience is really all that matters. It can be very self-interested. Now, what's amazing about this, if we can diverge, unless you have anything else to say about atheistic existentialism, I want to talk about Christian existentialism for a second.
What are the commonly known cults or organizations that claim this, but choose their own title?
Most governments in the world would be fairly existentialist in the way they tend to operate. The American enterprise is largely existentialist in the way we operate. And that is to say that individual meaning and value is projected to be of like highest value. Now, that's not true of Christians, not true of the Christian founders. It's just true of kind of the way the dynamics typically work with most people in this country. Existentialism is not going to be rooted in a religion because they deny everything beyond. Yeah, you could say modern Satanism might fit the paradigm. Actually, it would very neatly. Satanism is not the worship of a devil. Satanism is actually, the devil is an archetype. There is no God, so you are the God of your own universe. And Satan, as he rebelled against God, is an instruction for us all to rebel against powers and authorities, particularly ones that tell us what to do. So it would fit neatly with the Church of Satan, I suppose. But good question. All right, let me talk about how the church falls apart over and over again throughout history. This cycle's being repeated in our day. Liberal Christianity emerges not in a vacuum. You know what I mean by liberal Christianity? Okay, it's a Christianity that begins to diminish the authority of Scripture, diminishes Godhood, and whether or not God was actually there. So you'll have Christians, hang on, big air quotes, big fake air quotes. You have Christians today who will say things like this: it really doesn't matter if Jesus rose from the dead or not. What matters is, have you accepted his teachings, and does it really change the way you live and look at people? All right, that's liberal Christianity. Liberal Christianity is what Christian existentialism emerged from as a rebellion against liberal Christianity. So there was a Danish Lutheranism that was very cold. It had taken all of Christianity and it had boiled them down into a bunch of goods and bads. Didn't matter if Jesus rose from the dead, probably didn't, probably wasn't born of a virgin. What mattered was, are we taking care of the poor? And are we doing good deeds? This, by the way, almost always accompanies liberal Christianity. If you want to see Christianity fall apart, watch for Christians who go, it's about service and taking care of the poor. Who was the biggest advocate for the poor we see among Jesus' disciples? Judas. Judas is the one who was terribly upset when the woman, was anointing Jesus' feet. And I'm not saying that Christians shouldn't take care of the poor. I'm saying what happens is we get in this trend where instead of preaching the gospel message of Jesus Christ, that salvation is what people need, instead we start going, we need to take care of people's physical needs. And we start to prioritize that, and there becomes this shift where people start going, the physical needs of the community and outreach in community. Read the New Testament and what the New Testament church was about. Was it about the community out there? It was about the community in here. It's about the community of believers. So what happens with liberal Christianity is they start to get this idea that we are the most righteous because we're doing all the things. Look at the concrete things we've been doing. And it emerges to the point where the gospel message is subverted by a social gospel. Does that make sense? Well, this was happening in Danish Lutheranism. And a guy by the name of Soren Kierkegaard, who was a philosopher, stepped up and he began to write works and say, he was rebelling against the theologians of his day. The brightest theologians of his day said this: hey, you know what we know now? Moses didn't really write the Pentateuch. And in fact, we're quite certain that most of the Bible was just pieced together, and it's not really true. That's what academia said during that time period, right? All the brightest minds were saying that. All the universities were saying that. Christianity was being undermined universally. And Christians were left at a point where they either went, I'm just going to believe it anyway, which a lot of Christians took that stand. And some Christians like Soren Kierkegaard and Immanuel Kant and a few others went, you know what? Whatever happened, I cannot be sure of, but I can know this. My experience of Jesus Christ right now is that this is a reality. And they began to elevate the existential experience, right? My existence shows me that Christianity is true. You can say it didn't happen historically, but I know it happened for me. Now, what's weird about this is most of us look at that and we're like, that's kind of a terrible position. But that actually lifted Christianity out of liberalism in certain parts of Europe. So Christianity began to take on this new kind of fervor where they had this stale orthodoxy that had become liberal. It actually lifted some of Christianity out of that. Now, if you actually look at it, the best people who were the Christian existentialists actually just end up looking like what we would call a Christian, what we would call Christian. The thing is they kind of drank the poison there in the sense that they went, we accept your version of the historicity of scriptures, rather than going, I'm not sure you're credible. I'm not sure what you're saying is actually true. We're going to investigate it, which Protestants later on started doing. That's the emergence of modern apologetics, where Christians going, your theories about the scriptures are incorrect. We're going to go dig in the Middle East. And then we discovered over and over again that it is historically validated. By the way, most universities right now in this country are still operating on information about Christianity and historical criticisms of biblical texts that are hundreds of years old. Their views about how we can dismiss scriptures are so antiquated and outdated that they're not even worth talking about in the classroom. But all the professors, they got what they wanted to hear, and they're just sticking with it. So even though scholarship has well moved on and is now validating all of these things, a lot of university professors have just not chased it down. Same thing with Darwinism, outdated ideas, and they just cling to it, and they'll just keep propagating it in the same ways. Things that have failed, things that Darwin said failed, but
things in the title.
Yeah. We did look that up the other week, didn't we? Yeah. All right. Questions about existentialism?
So would you say that most people who are existentialistic are just kind of going through life, or is there a group of people who are very, very serious about it?
There are definitely people who are very, very serious about it. Many people who are very serious about it. The bulk of people are what I would call functional existentialists, in the sense that they believe that they're creating their own meaning and value, but they really haven't stopped. They've never made it to nihilism. All right, so if we take my chart that I used earlier about like sequentially how everything happens, you've got monotheism, and then you have deism, and then you have naturalism, and then you have nihilism, and then you have existentialism. I try to push everybody from the categories outside of theism toward nihilism, because the existentialist needs to know that they really haven't broken loose. They haven't gotten free. The deist needs to know that their version of God is not one that's a salvation version of God. And so they are as good as an atheist in God's eyes. And so we've got to push them toward nihilism. This is really what you believe. This is what you're practicing. You're going to hell the easy way, right? And the same thing with naturalism. We're pushing them toward nihilism. Why? Because nihilism is reality. If what they're saying is true, nihilism is the only place anybody outside of the God paradigm should land. And so I push them toward that because, well, to just try to illustrate it, there's sort of a geyser effect. When they hit nihilism, they go, I can't stay here. And it's possible that person gets pushed into theism because they're really left with those two choices. So I do the same thing with an existentialist that I would do with a naturalist or anybody else. I try to show them that ultimately, if they're just playing fair with their own worldview, they're landing in nihilism. No meaning, no value, no purpose, no free will, ultimate death at the end of all things, pointless causation of existence, all of those things. And you hand that to them and go, this is your life, or there's a God. Would you be interested in maybe knowing whether or not there's a God? And then most people in that condition would be like, okay, I'm willing to discuss that. Yeah, Mike.
Every one of these is a violation of the first commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you set him aside, you're left with a void that
Yeah.
you're going to make a truth statement, and you're going to make your own God, whether it's yourself or an idea.
Yeah.
And they cannot back it up.
Right.
They're authority themselves.
Right. This is the great part about being a Christian. It's almost like being in sales, but selling the best thing in the world. And it's the thing that everybody really wants way down deep. Christianity is true. This is why we don't have to be afraid of facts as they're ushered out anywhere. I don't have to be afraid of other worldviews or other ideas. They're no threat to me. And in fact, once we begin looking at them, they end up becoming evidence for my position. That's what I really believe. I've found it to be the case over and over again. So when you encounter somebody like this, and they're chasing their own gods, or they're trying to be their own god, one of the glories of this is if we can just sit down and discuss it, and I can get you to really start thinking, I can tip you over that edge. I can show you that you're standing with your feet firmly planted in midair, or you're staring down into the abyss, and you start looking at your worldview and you go, what I believe doesn't make sense. And once a person reaches that point, they either have to go, I'm going to double down on it, and I'm going to call you names, and I'm going to hate you and reject you, which is usually how people will respond to this, or they'll go, maybe we can talk about this. Yeah, Chris. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And is constantly trying to castrate the power of the church by getting us to focus on things that are not the main thing. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
One of the best questions we ever heard when early on, before you were born, when we were learning how to witness and all that, one of the best questions I ever heard was getting into a discussion with somebody in a different worldview or whatever, and the question comes up, if you were wrong, would you want to know it?
Yeah. Steve.
Like, well, yeah, that's almost like you still beat your wife.
Yeah. Yeah. I have some good stories about using that exact line. Hang on, Steve says, one of the best questions you can ask somebody, and it's really good and very telling, but when you find out somebody has a different worldview than you, asking the question, if you were wrong, would you want to know?
Well, how about if someone asked us that?
Yeah.
How would we answer that as a believer?
I can tell you, I've answered it myself, and I answer it every time I ask them. Here's what I say to them. I want to know if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Because I will be a much different person. I'll be a horrible human being. And I'm serious. If there is no God, then I have plunged the depths of this enough to know that nihilism is absolutely true if there is no God, which means there's no meaning, no value, no purpose. I would probably try to take advantage of every other human being I could. You might think, that's terrible, Ben. You're a preacher. Like, how could that's rational? That without Jesus Christ, without the God who is in heaven, that is a reasonable way to live. Right off myself, probably. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, Christ is not risen from the dead. We are to be the most pitied of all men. I mean, it's what a pathetic worldview we'd be a part of. I'll mention the thing here in just a minute, Brian.
Can you go back? I got a little lost when you were talking about the liberal Christianity and Christian existentialism.
Yes.
Trying to understand existentialism means God,
yeah.
Nihilism,
yes. So Christian existentialism is a thing. It's a different worldview than existentialism, because you'll notice I've been calling the other one atheistic existentialism most of the time. A Christian existentialism basically says, and it's valid. It basically says, I'm stuck with what I know and what I perceive in this world. All right. So again, I did not know God and then come to know myself. I came to know that I existed, and then I began to try to figure out this world that I seem to find myself in. And in the middle of that, I keep having these experiences that I would say are pulling me towards this God idea. And even though this whole group is criticizing the history of the Gospels and the historicity of Scripture and challenging the notion of this God, it's a lived reality for me. Like it's working in my life, and it seems so real in every respect. And so even if you say it's historically not valid, I say it matters in my life. That's kind of where they come from on that. Great question about to clarify. In a sense, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's the best thing, because like I really believe it's very important that the Bible is historically valid, right? But they were, I think, doing the best they could with all of academia just crushing down on Christianity and trying to destroy Christianity. Obviously, the better response would be, let's get our own academics, let's go into the fields, let's prove these guys wrong. And that has progressively happened since that time, where none of those views are held by serious like theologians and biblical historians in this day and age. Most of that stuff's been shunted aside.
But they're making a choice to follow God, just like all of us are making
Yes.
a choice to follow God. So therefore, you should be able to be saved.
Yeah, I think they're saved. I think Soren Kierkegaard's going to be in heaven with us, right? And Karl Barth would be another one. And again, he probably looks pretty liberal compared to most of the Christian theologians we like. But Karl Barth was doing the same thing. It was coming at it in an existentialist way. And he would be considered a Christian existentialist, and basically saying, you know, all of what the liberal Christians are telling you, set that aside. The gospel does matter, and it is important. And Jesus is who he said he is. So they came back, and it's a weird thing because for us, it almost seems like it would be flipping the other direction. But what they're saying is history doesn't matter. Your knowledge sets don't matter. What matters is this is true. And I don't know if it's historically true, but it's true. For me, it's true. And so you got kind of practical, functional Christians coming out of liberal Christianity. And by the way, if you just look at liberal Christianity, if you're not convinced on this, when the churches start aiming at something other than the gospel message and individuals need to be saved, churches fall apart. Right now, in the last couple years, we have lost, I think, 9% of the Christians in this country. There's been a flip where people consider themselves Christians. 9% of that has disappeared. And you look at that and it's like, wow, Christianity's falling apart. You got to look closer at the numbers. Every place that Christianity is disappearing are the churches that have gone liberal. And the churches that are conservative are all growing. So Christianity is getting smaller in breadth because there's more people who go to churches where they're like, it doesn't matter if Jesus really raised from the dead, or like, I'm not waking up on Sunday morning. Why would I go in for that? Are we going to talk about the Vietnam War church today? What are we doing?
So you're suggesting liberal Christianity is shrinking.
It is, yeah. And it happens, it's happened through history. Everywhere the church starts heading that direction, the church just takes a nosedive because who cares anymore? Like, why would you pursue it?
So the Christian existential.
It's okay. Existentialist, Christian existentialist.
They're, if I'm hearing this right,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going in, they're not,
Mm-hmm.
but they're going to stick to the gospel.
Yeah.
And everything else, they're not going to go to battle on any of it.
Right. They're basically saying,
they're not going to say whether they believe any of the Old Testament. They're not going to believe. But they're going to stick to the gospel. They know that Christ is their Savior.
Yep.
And that's what they're sticking with, because that's going to get them to heaven. And the rest of it is just fairy tales.
And they don't assign it to fairy tales. They would say that what's important is not whether it historically happened. What's important is what it's doing to me. And so it all comes back to their experience of it. So and again, I would not call this a flourishing Christianity, but I think it's a way that a lot of people came back to the real God. Yeah, rather than letting their faith completely fall apart as it was being destroyed by, remember, these are European governments that are controlling the church. And so as the governments became more secular, the church became more secular and corrupt. And, Lutheranism was one of those that's gotten corrupted over and over again in different regions and cultures, certainly in Germany. Yeah.
With Christian existentialism had a lot of fun too, because we put experience is not such truth.
Correct.
Right? And so one of the precursors still up alive. There's a great book that's been free on Christianity. He was one of the last conservative old guards in Boston Seminary, and he was involved in the Presbyterian. They were doing this higher criticism.
Yep.
But it's so relevant.
Well, as part of that then too, as long as I found God.
Can you shoot me that reference?
As long as I found God in Christ, I'm okay. But my version of it may be different than everybody else's.
Yeah.
As long as I'm claiming it, I'm good.
Yeah, and I think their view.
I'm right.
Yeah.
Or not, I'm good.
Yeah, their view, and this is why I think it was helpful in that setting. The church had grown very cold and very stale. And again, they were saying nothing, but these were people who were discovering vitality in the church and the Christ experience. And so even though theologically they were not like where we would want them to be ideally, they did well in their scenario to personalize and still make a passionate like approach to God. So it better than the alternative, I guess I should say. But Christian existentialism, yes.
You get back to Mike's thing.
Which one?
Mike asked you, what if somebody asked you at home?
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I never answered that. Yeah. No. So I actually use this phrase when I'm communicating the gospel to people. If I'm talking to them, if I see that they're of a radically different worldview, and we start disagreeing, and I can tell that they're being a little standoffish with data and facts, and a little selective as to what they will accept and won't, I ask that question: if you were wrong, would you want to know? And usually they get stunned by that. Like people, that's the stagger moment where they start to answer and then they're like, I don't know. And then I say, if I'm wrong, I want to know that I'm wrong. Because if I'm wrong, I have been wasting my life. My life has been basically one grand con with a whole bunch of people. Now, I'm very confident that I'm not wrong because I've been researching this for a long time. But if you can prove me wrong, you'd be doing me a favor. To that end, would you want to know if you're wrong? And then they're pretty well stuck. They're either going to say, and I've had a few people say, no, I'd rather not. And then I drop it. I'm just like, okay. And then we're done. Our conversation's over. Because if a person says, I'd rather not know that I was wrong, if that's what they say, then we're not going anywhere. So you just let it go. I think the one guy you're talking about who used that says, I've never had a no that sticks. In other words, would you want to know you're wrong? And a person's like, no. He's like, okay. And he just leaves it. And then the person's like, why wouldn't he? Hang on. Okay, well, I do want to talk about this now because it's, this desire to go, why would he just drop it like that? Aren't you going to try to sell me something? Yeah, go ahead.
Someone asked me that, I would honestly have to say yes. I wouldn't
Yeah.
know if I'm wrong, but I'm prepared to defend my position.
Oh yeah.
The Lord, the Bible.
Absolutely. And this is part of why I can say that. When I say yes, I'd like to know that I'm wrong. That's most of these questions I've been asked. There are very few challenges to the faith I haven't heard. So I'm inviting them, please, because here's what happens with most non-believers. When we get into a conversation, they go, "Oh, I wouldn't want to offend you or make you leave your fairy tale." I can tell you're a good person, and so they what they're saying, and it's the adversary in them. It's the adversary going, you wouldn't want to provoke this person and make them feel bad. You'd make them look like an idiot here in front of everybody. Because if the adversary can keep that conversation from happening, the adversary wants to keep that conversation from happening. So what you say to them is, you'd be doing me a favor. Come on, bring it. I want every challenge you can muster. Please let me hear it. And most atheists are taken aback by that too, because that's not the normal response they get from Christians. Are we over time? Was it? Okay, it's time. Melissa's like, please get your kids out of here. All right, let's close up with a word of prayer, guys. Our Father, I thank you that meaning is bigger than any one of us. That in the sense that there is an objective universe and 2 + 2 makes 4, that there is a God, you, Almighty Lord, and that you have given your Son, and this is a historical reality that has taken place, that he died and took all of our sins upon him. Father, I praise you that this is the truth, that we can have real meaning, real purpose, actual free will, and ability to engage in this life in meaningful ways and in eternity beyond this life. God, I pray that as we keep delving into these worldviews, that we'll constantly be drawn back to the beauty of what you've given us. You are amazing, our Lord. Help us to be faithful in all we do. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.